I stared at the invitation that wasn't meant for me. There it was, pristine white cardstock with gold foil lettering addressed to my neighbor across the hall. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson cordially invite you to celebrate the wedding of their daughter, Diana, to Jacob Miller. My stomach twisted into a knot. Diana, my younger sister. Jacob, my ex-husband of 3 years. And I, Helen Clark, hadn't received so much as a text message about it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation had been misdelivered, a twist of fate that felt particularly cruel on a Tuesday morning when I was already running late for work. I'd found it slipped under my door, the delivery person clearly confused by our apartment numbers. For a moment, I convinced myself it was some elaborate prank. Until I saw the engagement photo tucked inside. Diana's face glowed with happiness as Jacob wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder in the exact same pose from our own engagement photos 7 years earlier. I'm Helen Clark, 52 years old, and until that moment with the invitation, I thought I'd finally rebuilt my life after a divorce that blindsided me. 3 years earlier, Jacob had walked out claiming we'd grown apart after 15 years of marriage. What he meant was that at 49, I'd become invisible to him. Too old, too settled, too predictable. Looking back, I should have seen the signs: late nights at work, the sudden interest in physical fitness, the secretive phone calls. All the cliches of a midlife crisis affair that I'd been too trusting to recognize. What I couldn't have predicted was that the other woman would be Diana, my sister who was 12 years younger than me. Diana, who I'd practically raised after our mother died when she was 9. Diana, who called me for advice on everything from cooking to career moves. Diana, who'd cried on my shoulder through breakups and celebrated with me during promotions. Diana, who apparently had been seeing Jacob behind my back for who knows how long. That Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My hands trembled as I dialed our family home. My father and his second wife still lived in the same house where Diana and I had grown up. I needed answers. Needed to confirm this wasn't some elaborate misunderstanding. My stepmother Vivian answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Clark residence." "Vivian, it's Helen." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Helen." Her tone immediately cooled. "Your father's not here right now." "That's fine. I actually wanted to ask you something." I took a deep breath. "Is Diana getting married to Jacob? My ex-husband Jacob?" The silence that followed told me everything. Then came the defensiveness. "Helen, honestly, I'm not sure why you're calling about this. Diana hoped you'd be mature enough to hear it from someone else first. It's been 3 years since your divorce." My chest tightened. "So it's true? And everyone knew except me?" "Don't be dramatic. It's not like that." Her voice lowered slightly. "Look, Diana and Jacob reconnected last year at your father's birthday party. These things happen. They're adults. Your father and I are very happy for them." "And no one thought to tell me? My own sister and my ex-husband?" Vivian sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Helen, Diana was worried you'd react exactly like this. The wedding is in 3 weeks. We all thought it would be easier if you weren't there. For everyone's sake." The blood rushed to my face. "You've excluded me from my own sister's wedding? Does Dad know about this?" Of course he does. He agrees it's for the best." "Helen, you've always been dramatic about these things. Remember when Diana got into Harvard and you made it all about how you never got to go to college because you were helping raise her? That stung because it was true. I'd put off my education to help our widowed father with Diana after our mother died. I'd worked multiple jobs to contribute to Diana's college fund while putting myself through night school. But I'd never once thrown it in her face, at least not intentionally. I need to talk to Diana, I said firmly. She's very busy with wedding preparations. I'll tell her you called. The dismissal in Vivian's voice was unmistakable. Helen, please don't make this difficult. Diana deserves her special day. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the morning in a daze. I tried calling Diana's cell phone 4 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. Finally, I sent a text. We need to talk. Please. 3 hours later, her reply came through. I'm sorry you found out this way. But Jacob and I are in love. It just happened. I hope someday you can be happy for us. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my best friend Rachel, the one person who'd stood by me through the divorce, but whom I'd gradually lost touch with as I buried myself in work and healing. Helen, is everything okay? Rachel's voice carried the surprise of someone receiving a call from a ghost. Diana is marrying Jacob. My sister is marrying my ex-husband. The words felt surreal leaving my mouth. What? When? How did this happen? Rachel's shock validated my own feelings. Apparently, they reconnected at my father's birthday party last year. The wedding is in 3 weeks and I wasn't invited. They all decided it would be easier if I wasn't there. I don't even have words. Do you want me to come over? An hour later, Rachel was at my door with a bottle of wine and takeout. We sat on my small balcony overlooking the city, and for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not for losing Jacob, but for the betrayal by my family. You know what hurts the most? I said, wiping away tears. It's not even about Jacob. Our marriage was over long before he left. It's that Diana didn't tell me herself. It's that my entire family conspired to keep me in the dark and then exclude me like I'm some unstable element that would ruin everything. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. What are you going to do? I stared out at the cityscape, lights twinkling in the distance. I don't know. Part of me wants to show up anyway, make a scene, demand answers. Another part just wants to disappear, cut them all off completely. What do you actually want, Helen? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not what you think you should want, or what would hurt them most. What would make you feel better in the long run? I considered this. I want to understand why. I want Diana to look me in the eye and tell me why she thought it was okay to date my ex-husband in secret. I want to know if what I did for her all those years meant anything at all. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew Diana worked as a marketing executive at a firm downtown. Instead of calling again, I went to her office building and waited in the lobby. At lunch hour, the elevator doors opened, and there she was, my younger sister, looking polished in a tailored suit, her chestnut hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She was laughing at something on her phone. When she looked up and saw me, the laugh died in her throat. Helen? What are you doing here? We need to talk, Diana. Really talk. Her eyes darted around the lobby. This isn't a good time. I have a lunch meeting. Cancel it, I said firmly. Your wedding is in 3 weeks, and you didn't think to. Tell me you're marrying my ex-husband. I think you can spare 30 minutes. She hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Fine. There's a coffee shop around the corner. We sat in silence until our coffees arrived. Diana kept checking her phone, her discomfort palpable. How long? I finally asked. How long were you seeing him before he left me? Diana's head snapped up. It wasn't like that. We didn't start dating until almost a year after your divorce was finalized. So at Dad's birthday party? Yes, we reconnected there. Helen, I didn't plan this. It just happened. I took a sip of my coffee, watching her over the rim. And you didn't think I deserved to know? You've been together for a year, and you're getting married, and you couldn't pick up the phone once? Diana had the grace to look ashamed. I tried to tell you so many times, but you were finally doing better. You had your new job, your new apartment. You seemed happy for the first time since the divorce. I didn't want to ruin that. So instead, you planned a wedding and excluded me completely? You let me find out from a misdelivered invitation? She winced. That wasn't supposed to happen. We were going to tell you after the wedding. Jacob thought it would be easier that way. Jacob thought. What about what you thought, Diana? What about what I might think or feel? Diana's eyes flashed with sudden defensiveness. You always do this. Make me feel guilty for living my life. I've spent years walking on eggshells around you, Helen. Ever since Mom died, it's been all about your sacrifices, how much you gave up for me. The accusation struck me like a physical blow. When have I ever held that over you? You don't have to say it. It's in everything you do, every conversation. The martyr older sister who gave up everything for me. Do you know how suffocating that is? I sat back, stunned. Is that really how you see me? Sometimes, she admitted, looking down at her hands. Look, I love you, Helen. You're my sister. But Jacob and I? We connect in a way I've never experienced before. He understands me. And you think he didn't understand me? That he didn't say the exact same things to me 15 years ago? Diana's expression hardened. Our relationship is different. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I'm not going to apologize for falling in love. Does he still do that thing where he leaves his wet towels on the bathroom floor? Or forgets birthdays until the last minute? Does he still work late every Thursday no matter what you have planned? The questions spilled out before I could stop them. Diana stood abruptly. This is exactly why we didn't tell you. I knew you'd try to poison what we have. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Helen. Dad and Vivian agree it's best if you don't come. I hope someday you can be happy for us. But until then, please respect our decision. She walked out, leaving me alone with 2 cooling coffees and the crushing weight of family betrayal. For the next few days, I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. But at night, alone in my apartment, the conversation with Diana played on repeat in my head. Was she right? Had I been subtly making her feel guilty all these years? Had I become someone so bitter and difficult that my entire family thought it better to exclude me from a major life event? On Friday evening, I received a text from my father. Helen, I'm sorry about all this. Diana says you two spoke. I hope you understand our position. This is a happy time for her. No acknowledgement of how I might feel, no recognition of the bizarre situation they'd created. Just another plea for me to disappear quietly and not cause problems. That night, I did something impulsive. I booked a flight to San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, departing in 2 days, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had never prioritized. The small colonial town with its vibrant art scene had been calling to me since I'd read about it in a travel magazine. Years ago, Jacob had dismissed it as too touristy when I'd suggested it for our 10th anniversary. Instead, we'd gone to a golf resort he preferred. When Sunday arrived, I packed a single suitcase, locked my apartment, and headed to the airport. I'd taken a 2-week leave from work, citing a family emergency. In a way, it was true. My family had emerged as the emergency I needed to escape. The moment I stepped off the plane in Mexico, the warm air enveloped me like a gentle embrace. San Miguel de Allende was even more beautiful than the pictures. Cobblestone streets winding up and down hills, colonial buildings painted in warm oranges and yellows, the magnificent pink parish church rising from the main square. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I checked into a small boutique hotel near the center of town. My room opened onto a courtyard filled with bougainvillea and a small fountain. That evening, I wandered the streets, eventually finding myself in the main square where locals and tourists gathered as the sun set. An older man was playing guitar while his granddaughter danced beside him, her red dress twirling. I sat on a bench, watching them, when someone spoke beside me in accented English. They come every evening. The girl, Lucia, she is learning traditional dances. Her grandfather played guitar for the local restaurants for 40 years. I turned to see a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and warm brown eyes. She smiled and introduced herself as Elena, a local artist. "Are you visiting San Miguel alone?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, surprised by my willingness to engage with a stranger. I needed a change of scenery. Elena nodded as if she understood completely. Many come to San Miguel for transformation. Something about this place helps people find what they've lost, or perhaps discover what they never knew they had. The next morning, on Elena's recommendation, I visited her art studio tucked away on a side street. The walls were covered with vibrant paintings, landscapes, abstract pieces, and portraits that somehow captured the essence of their subjects beyond mere physical appearance. "These are incredible," I told her honestly. "Thank you. I didn't start painting until I was 55, she revealed. "Before that, I was an accountant. Can you imagine? All those years counting other people's money when I could have been creating. What made you change?" "My husband died. We'd been married 30 years. I realized I'd spent those decades living his life, his dreams. I didn't know who I was without him." She gestured around the studio. "So I came to San Miguel to find out." Something about her story resonated deeply. "I'm 52, I found myself saying, "and I feel like I'm just realizing I've spent my whole life being defined by other people's needs and expectations." Elena smiled. "Then you've come to the right place. San Miguel has a way of helping people rediscover themselves." She picked up a blank canvas. "Have you ever painted before?" I laughed. "Not since elementary school art class." "Perfect. No bad habits to unlearn." She set up the canvas on an easel. "Sometimes we need to create something new to understand what's been there all along." That afternoon stretched into evening as Elena patiently guided me through the basics of painting. My first attempt was terrible, clumsy landscapes with awkward proportions. But there was something freeing about making mistakes, about creating something purely for the joy of creation rather than for someone else's approval. As the days passed, I fell into a routine. Mornings exploring the town, afternoons in Elena's studio learning to paint, evenings in the plaza watching the world go by. Sometimes Elena joined me for dinner, introducing me to local dishes and sharing stories of her own journey from grief to rediscovery. One evening, about a week into my stay, Elena asked me directly, "What are you running from, Helen? Most people who come here alone have left something behind." The question caught me off guard, but in the golden light of sunset, with the distant sound of music floating through the air, the truth slipped out easily. I told her about Jacob, about Diana, about the wedding I wasn't invited to that was happening in just over a week. Elena listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she finally said, "there's a traditional belief here about betrayal. They say it's like a snake bite. The venom will kill you if you chase the snake seeking revenge, but it becomes medicine if you stay still and let it transform you." "I'm not sure I know how to do that," I admitted. "Start with forgiveness. Not for them. For yourself." What do I need to forgive myself for? For believing that your worth depends on how others value you. For letting your sister's choices determine your happiness. For waiting until now to discover who Helen really is. The words hit me like gentle rain, uncomfortable at first, then cleansing. That night in my hotel room, I took out the sketchbook Elena had given me and began drawing. Not landscapes or still lifes, but memories. My mother teaching me to bake. My father teaching me to ride a bike before Diana was born. The day I'd gotten my first apartment. small moments where I'd felt completely myself. 2 days before Diana's wedding, I received a text from Rachel. "How are you doing? The big day is almost here. Do you want me to check in on you Saturday?" I looked around my hotel room, at the canvases I'd created leaning against the wall, imperfect but authentically mine. I thought about Elena's words about forgiveness as medicine. "I'm actually in Mexico," I replied. "Best decision I've ever made. I'm learning to paint." Rachel's response came quickly. "What? Helen Clark, spontaneous traveler? I need details." We arranged a video call later that evening. Rachel's face lit up when she saw me. "You look different," she said. "Relaxed, happy even." "I feel different," I admitted. Being away from everything, I can see more clearly now. How much of my identity was wrapped up in being the responsible older sister, the perfect wife, the dutiful daughter. I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone else needed me to be. And now? Now I'm discovering who I am when no one's watching. It turns out I might be an artist. I laughed, still not entirely believing it myself. Or at least someone who loves creating art even if it's terrible. Rachel's expression grew serious. "Diana called me yesterday. She wanted to know if I'd heard from you. Apparently your father is worried since you're not answering his texts." "What did you tell her?" "That I hadn't heard from you in days. I didn't think it was my place to share your location." She hesitated. "Helen, the wedding is day after tomorrow. Are you really okay with not being there?" I considered this. A week ago, I would have said no. I would have been devastated, angry, plotting ways to make them feel guilty. But now, I think I'm exactly where I need to be. The day of Diana's wedding dawned bright and clear in San Miguel. I woke early and walked to the top of a nearby hill, watching the sun rise over the colonial town. My phone buzzed, with messages I didn't read. Instead, I sat in silence, thinking about the parallel lives unfolding thousands of miles apart. Diana in her wedding dress, me in this moment of solitude and unexpected peace. Later that morning, I joined Elena in her studio. She took one look at me and nodded in understanding. "Today is the wedding?" she asked. "Yes." "Then today we paint something special." She guided me to a larger canvas than I'd used before. "Today you paint your future, not your past." I worked for hours, losing myself in color and texture and possibility. The painting that emerged wasn't technically skilled, but it vibrated with energy. A woman standing at the edge of a colorful town, looking out toward distant mountains, her face turned not toward what she was leaving behind, but toward what awaited her. When I finally set down my brush, Elena studied the painting thoughtfully. "Yes," she said simply. "This is the real Helen Clark." That evening I finally checked my phone. Multiple texts from my father, increasingly concerned. One from Vivian, terse and accusatory. "Your absence is causing unnecessary stress on your sister's special day." And surprisingly, one from Diana sent just an hour earlier. "I wish you were here. I'm sorry for everything. Call me when you can." I sat with those messages, feeling their emotional pull but no longer controlled by it. After dinner, I called my father. "Helen, where have you been? We've been worried sick." His voice carried both relief and lingering anger. "I'm fine, Dad. I'm in Mexico, taking some time for myself." "Mexico? What on earth? Diana's wedding was today." "I know. I wasn't invited, remember?" His voice softened slightly. "Helen, we were trying to avoid a difficult situation." "By excluding your eldest daughter? By pretending the whole situation wasn't incredibly painful and bizarre?" He sighed heavily. "It wasn't handled well. I see that now." "How was the wedding?" I asked, surprised to find I genuinely wanted to know. "It was nice." He paused. "Diana missed you. She wouldn't admit it, but I could tell." When are you coming home? I looked out my window at the twinkling lights of San Miguel, at the painting drying on its easel. I'm not sure yet, Dad. I'm discovering some things about myself here. Things I should have explored years ago. What things? He asked, confusion evident in his voice. I'm painting, and I'm good at it, or getting better anyway. I'm meeting people who see me as just Helen, not as someone's sister or ex-wife or daughter. That's wonderful, sweetheart. But you have responsibilities back home. Your job. My job will be there, I said firmly. Or if not, I'll find another one. Dad, for the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. Not out of selfishness, but because I'm finally understanding that I matter too. After we hung up, I texted Diana. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope it was everything you wanted. I'm taking some time for myself in Mexico. When I'm ready, we'll talk? Her response came quickly. Mexico? That's so unlike you. Jacob proposed at the rehearsal dinner last night. Dad was upset you weren't there to see it. Everyone kept asking where you were. It felt wrong without you. The old Helen would have felt vindicated by this admission, would have seized the opportunity to inflict guilt. Instead, I replied simply, I'm learning to paint. I think Mom would have loved it here. 3 weeks later, I was still in San Miguel. What had started as an impulsive escape had evolved into something more meaningful. Elena had introduced me to other artists in the community, and I'd even sold 2 small paintings to tourists who'd wandered into a local gallery where she'd helped me display my work. My leave from work had expired, but after a long conversation with my boss, we'd arranged for me to work remotely for another month. You sound different, she'd said during our call. More confident. It suits you. Rachel had booked a flight to visit the following week, eager to see this transformation for herself. My father had called twice more, his initial confusion giving way to a tentative support when he heard the happiness in my voice. And then there was Diana. After returning from her honeymoon, she'd sent me photos of the wedding, an olive branch I hadn't expected. We'd exchanged a few careful texts, neither of us quite ready to delve into the deeper hurt, but both acknowledging that the relationship wasn't irreparable. One evening, as I sat in the plaza sketching the cathedral as the sun set behind it, my phone rang. It was Diana. Helen, do you have a minute? Of course, I said, setting down my sketchbook. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about us. Her voice sounded different, more mature somehow. Jacob and I had a fight last night, about his wet towels on the bathroom floor, actually. Despite everything, I laughed. Some things never change. That's just it. You tried to warn me in your way, and I didn't listen because I was so caught up in the romance of it all. She paused. I found your old journals in Dad's attic last week, the ones you kept after Mom died. I hope you don't mind that I read them. I froze. Those journals contained my unfiltered teenage thoughts, grief over our mother, frustration at having to grow up too quickly, love for Diana mixed with occasional resentment. I had no idea what you went through, Diana continued. How much you gave up for me. You never complained, not really. You just did what needed to be done. Diana, no, please let me finish. I've been so selfish, Helen. I convinced myself you were this overbearing martyr because it was easier than acknowledging the truth, that I owe you a debt I can never repay. You don't owe me anything, I said softly. We were both children, dealing with an impossible situation. But I do owe you an apology. For Jacob, for the wedding, for all of it. I was wrong. We all were. She took a deep breath. Can you forgive me? In the plaza, a guitarist began to play, the notes floating up into the darkening sky. I thought about Elena's words about forgiveness. As medicine, about snake bites and transformation. I'm working on it, I answered honestly. Not just forgiving you, but forgiving myself for living so long for other people instead of for me. Dad showed me your paintings, the ones you sent photos of. They're beautiful, Helen. I had no idea you had that in you. Neither did I admitted. It took losing everything I thought was important to discover what actually is. After we hung up, I remained in the plaza, adding final touches to my sketch as stars appeared overhead. The cathedral on my page wasn't technically perfect, but it captured something essential, the way the structure reached toward the sky, rooted in history yet aspiring to something higher. Later that night, I emailed my boss with a decision I'd been contemplating for days. I would resign from my position at the end of the month. The severance package would give me a cushion while I explored this new path. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. As I prepared for bed, I noticed a new message from Diana. Whatever you're finding in Mexico, I'm happy for you. You deserve this. When you're ready to come home, things will be different. I promise. I smiled, realizing that home had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer defined by other people's expectations or my roles in their lives. Home was wherever I could be authentically Helen, the woman who was still emerging, still creating, herself, one brushstroke at a time. I fell asleep that night to the distant sound of music from the plaza, dreaming not of what I'd left behind, but of all that lay ahead. A canvas still being painted, a story still being written, finally, beautifully. My own. The morning after my conversation with Diana at the coffee shop, I woke up with a heaviness that seemed to press me into my mattress. For several minutes, I just stared at the ceiling, replaying her words in my mind. The accusation that I'd been holding my sacrifices over her head for years had cut deeper than I expected. Had I really become the bitter older sister who made everyone walk on eggshells? Was I truly so difficult that my entire family thought it better to exclude me from a major life event? I finally dragged myself out of bed and made coffee, standing by my kitchen window that overlooked the city park 3 blocks away. Children were already playing on the swings, their laughter barely audible through the glass. My phone lay on the counter where I'd left it the night before, screen dark and silent. No follow-up calls from Diana, no explanations from my father, not even a confrontation from Jacob. Just silence, as if I'd already been erased from their narrative. The realization hit me with unexpected force. They were relieved, I knew. The secret was out, and now they could proceed with their plans without the burden of my feelings. The wedding invitations had been sent, the venue booked, the future decided. I was an afterthought, a complication they'd managed to solve through exclusion. I picked up my phone and called the one person who might understand. My colleague Maggie answered on the second ring, her voice bright with surprise. Helen? Everything okay? You never call this early. Maggie and I had started at the publishing house on the same day 15 years ago. We weren't exactly friends. I'd kept most people at arm's length since the divorce, but she was the closest thing I had to an ally in my daily life. I need to use some vacation days, I said, bypassing pleasantries. Starting today. Today? Her surprise was evident. Helen, you haven't taken a day off in 3 years. What's going on? I hesitated, then decided the truth was simpler than any fiction I could create. My sister is marrying my ex-husband in 3 weeks. I just found out yesterday. I wasn't invited to the wedding. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Maggie, I'm here. I'm just processing. Your sister and Jacob? That's unbelievable? Cruel. Cliché. Pick your adjective. I was going to say a lot to handle. Are you okay? I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. Not remotely, but I will be. I just need some time away from everything. Of course, she said immediately. I'll tell Gordon you had a family emergency. He owes you after that Frankfurt manuscript disaster anyway. How much time do you need? 2 weeks, I said, the number coming to me spontaneously. Maybe more. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I had no plan, no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to be somewhere, anywhere, else. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, "Places to travel alone over 50." The search results populated with lists of safe destinations for senior solo travelers and best group tours for mature singles. I grimaced at the marketing, language that seemed to suggest I was one step away from a retirement home. I was 52, not 82. Frustrated, I changed my search. Where to go when your life falls apart? This yielded more interesting results. Spiritual retreats, meditation centers, hiking trails known for personal epiphanies. I scrolled through options, none quite right, until an image caught my eye. A cobblestone street lined with buildings. In warm oranges and yellows, a magnificent pink church rising in the background. San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. I vaguely remembered reading about it years ago. An artist's colony, a place where expatriates went to reinvent themselves. Jacob had dismissed it when I'd suggested it for an anniversary trip, preferring destinations with golf courses and business, networking opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jacob had never gone anywhere without an agenda, a way to maximize the experience for his career or social standing. Even our honeymoon had included casual meetings with publishing contacts in London. Within the hour, I had booked a flight leaving in 2 days, reserved a room at a small boutique hotel, and requested an expedited passport renewal since mine had expired the previous year. The spontaneity of these actions felt foreign, almost, as if someone else were making the decisions through my hands. The Helen Clark everyone knew, responsible, predictable, cautious, would never make such impulsive plans. But perhaps that Helen was part of the problem. The next day passed in a blur of preparations. I went to the bank and withdrew cash, bought a new suitcase to replace my battered old one, purchased travel-sized toiletries and comfortable walking shoes. I cleaned my apartment, paid bills ahead of schedule, and asked my neighbor to collect my mail. All practical tasks that kept my hands busy and my mind from spiraling into the questions that lurked at the edges of my consciousness. When had Diana and Jacob's relationship begun? Had they been seeing each other while we were still married? Had they laughed about me behind my back? Did everyone in my family know except me? That evening, the landline I rarely used rang. The caller ID showed my father's number. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately regretted it when I heard his message. "Helen, it's Dad. Vivian told me you called about Diana and Jacob. I should have told you myself. I'm sorry about that. Could you call me back when you get this, please?" His voice sounded older, hesitant in a way I wasn't accustomed to hearing. For a moment, my finger hovered over the callback button. Then, I remembered how quickly he had agreed with Vivian and Diana that I shouldn't attend the wedding, how easily I had been discarded from this family milestone. I didn't call back. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my small balcony. The city stretched before me, lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. Somewhere across town, my sister was probably trying on her wedding dress, my father was writing a toast, and my ex-husband was securing his place in my family while I was being written out of it. "Good riddance," I whispered to the night air, though I wasn't sure if I meant them or the woman I had been, the one who had spent her life accommodating others at her own expense. The morning of my departure, I woke before dawn, my suitcase already packed and waiting by the door. I showered, dressed, and made a final cup of coffee in my kitchen. As I waited for my rideshare to the airport, I received a text from Diana. "Helen, Dad says you haven't called him back. We need to talk about this like adults. This silent treatment isn't helping anyone." The accusation of childishness stung, especially coming from Diana, who had hidden her relationship with Jacob for a year and then excluded me from her wedding. I typed several responses, deleting each one, before settling on silence. What could I possibly say that wouldn't be twisted into evidence of my dramatic nature? The car arrived, and I locked my apartment door behind me. As we drove to the airport, I turned off my phone. The silence felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in days. Security, boarding, takeoff. The familiar rituals of air travel carried me forward without requiring much thought. It wasn't until the plane was cruising at altitude, the sprawl of the city disappearing beneath clouds, that the reality of what I was doing hit me. I, Helen Clark, dutiful daughter, responsible sister, predictable ex-wife, was flying to Mexico alone with no real plan beyond escape. The thought sent a surprising thrill through me, like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. When had I last done something solely for myself? Even my career, which I'd built carefully over decades, had been chosen partly for its stability, its ability to provide while allowing me time to help with Diana after our mother died. My apartment, my clothes, even my routines had been selected, for practicality rather than joy. The flight attendant offered me a drink, and on impulse I ordered champagne instead of my usual club soda. The woman in the seat beside me smiled. "Celebrating something?" she asked. I considered her question seriously. "A beginning, I think. Or maybe an ending. I'm not sure yet." She raised her own glass in a toast. "To new chapters, then." "To new chapters," I echoed, the bubbles tickling my nose as I sipped. 4 hours later, I stepped off the plane into the warm Mexican afternoon. The Leon airport was smaller than I expected, manageable in a way that calmed my initial anxiety about navigating a foreign country alone. I found my prearranged shuttle service and settled into the van for the 90-minute drive to San Miguel de Allende. As we left the airport behind, the landscape opened up, rolling hills, distant mountains, small farms with fields of corn and beans. The driver, Miguel, pointed out landmarks and shared bits of history in accented English. I listened, asked questions, and gazed out the window at this place that was nothing like the city I'd left behind. "First time in San Miguel?" Miguel asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I replied. "First time in Mexico, actually." "Ah, you picked a good place to start. San Miguel is special. People come for a week and stay for years." He smiled. "Something in the air, maybe? Or the light. Artists say the light is different here." As we approached the town, I understood what he meant. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden glow that softened edges and deepened colors. Sanny. Miguel appeared gradually. First a few outlying buildings, then more densely packed structures climbing the hillsides, all in warm earth tones with splashes of bougainvillea spilling over walls. The van couldn't navigate the narrow cobblestone streets of the historic center, so Miguel dropped me off at a small plaza. "Your hotel is just there," he said, pointing down a narrow street. 2 blocks, on the right. You can't miss it." I thanked him, tipped generously, wondering even as I did if I was following proper protocol, and wheeled my suitcase across the uneven stones. The vibration traveled up my arm as the wheels clattered over the cobblestones, a physical sensation that grounded me in the present moment. Hotel Casa Rosada was exactly as pictured online, a restored colonial building with a terracotta facade and a heavy wooden door. Inside, a small courtyard centered around a fountain, the sound of water creating a sense of peace that felt almost foreign after the tension of the past few days. The receptionist greeted me warmly, checked me in, and led me to my room on the Blau, 2nd floor. It was simple but charming. White walls, a wrought iron bed with a colorful woven blanket, a small desk beneath a window that overlooked the courtyard, and a bathroom with hand-painted tiles. "Breakfast is served in the courtyard from 7 to 10, she explained, "and here is a map of the town. The main square, El Jardín, is just 5 minutes walking. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last 2 days ebbed, leaving me hollow. What was I doing here, really? Running away from problems that would still exist when I returned. Hiding from the reality that my sister had chosen my ex-husband and my family had chosen them over me. I lay back on the bed, intending to rest for just a moment before unpacking, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, still fully clothed. When I woke, disoriented, the room was dark except for the glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. My watch showed it was just past 9 in the evening. I'd slept for nearly 4 hours. I was hungry, but too tired to venture out for a proper meal. Instead, I unpacked my suitcase, took a shower in the small bathroom with its surprisingly strong water pressure, and ate an energy bar I'd tucked into my carry-on. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would explore properly, find good food, see the sights. Tonight, I would rest. As I prepared for bed, I switched my phone back on for the first time since leaving for the airport. It immediately buzzed with accumulated notifications. 3 missed calls from my father, 2 from Diana, and a text from Jacob that simply read, "We need to talk. This isn't what you think." A wave of anger surged through me. How dare he reach out now, pretending there was some explanation that would make this situation acceptable? And what exactly did he think I thought? That he and my sister had developed feelings for each other and decided to get married without telling me? Because that much seemed undeniably true. I switched the phone off again without responding to anyone and slipped it into the desk drawer. I was thousands of miles away, in a different country, a different context. For tonight at least, they couldn't reach me. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window and the distant sound of church bells. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The invitation, Diana's cold dismissal, the hasty flight to Mexico. I lay still, waiting for the now familiar weight of betrayal to settle over me. Instead, I felt something unexpected, a flicker of curiosity, a gentle urge to discover what lay beyond my hotel room. I rose, dressed in comfortable clothes, and went downstairs to the courtyard where breakfast was being served. A small buffet offered fresh fruit, bread, cheese, and eggs made to order. I filled a plate and chose a table near the fountain, watching other guests as they chatted over coffee. They were mostly Americans and Canadians from what I could overhear, retirees, artists, a few younger couples. First morning in San Miguel? I looked up to find an older woman with silver-streaked black hair and warm brown eyes standing beside my table, coffee cup in hand. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. She smiled. "You have the look, a little overwhelmed, a little enchanted." She gestured to the empty chair across from me. "May I join you? I'm Elena Rojas." "Helen Clark," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "And yes, I arrived last night." "Vacation?" she asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. I hesitated. "More of an impromptu escape." Elena nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Many come to San Miguel for exactly that reason. Something about this place helps people find what they've lost, or perhaps discover what they never knew they had." There was something in her manner, a directness coupled with genuine warmth, that bypassed my usual reserve. Before I quite realized what was happening, I found myself telling this stranger an abbreviated version of my situation. My sister marrying my ex-husband, my exclusion from the wedding, my impulsive decision to flee. Elena listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked or pitying. When I finished, she said simply, "So you've come to San Miguel to hide. But perhaps you'll find instead." "Find what?" I asked. "That's the adventure, isn't it?" Her eyes crinkled with humor. But enough heavy conversation for breakfast. You should see the town while the morning light is still good. The cathedral looks most beautiful before noon. She gave me directions to El Jardín, the main square, and recommended a walking route that would show me the highlights of the historic center. Before leaving, she jotted an address on a napkin. My studio, if you'd like to visit tomorrow. I'm a painter. Sometimes seeing how others create helps us understand our own possibilities. I thanked her, tucked the napkin into my pocket, and set out to explore San Miguel. The morning was pleasantly warm, the streets beginning to fill, with people as shops opened and vendors set up stalls selling everything from fresh fruit to handcrafted jewelry. Elena had been right about the cathedral, officially called La Parroquia de San Miguel Arcángel. Its pink neo-Gothic facade rose dramatically above the main square, improbable and beautiful. I sat on a bench in the shade of a laurel tree in El Jardín, watching as tourists snapped photos and locals crossed the square on their way to work or errands. For the first time in days, I wasn't thinking about Diana or Jacob or my father. I was simply present, observing the play of light on old stones, listening to snippets of conversation in Spanish and English, feeling the gentle breeze against my skin. I spent the morning wandering the streets, following no particular plan. I discovered a small market where I bought fresh oranges and a hand-woven scarf in shades of blue and purple. I found a quiet courtyard cafe where I lingered over excellent coffee. I explored narrow alleys that opened unexpectedly into sun-drenched plazas. By early afternoon, my feet were tired, but my spirits lifted. I returned to my hotel for a brief rest, then ventured out again as the heat of the day began to wane. This time, I found myself drawn to the sounds of music coming from a tree-lined street. Following the melody, I discovered a small gallery where a trio was playing traditional music while visitors browsed artwork displayed on the walls. I slipped inside, grateful for the air conditioning and the chance to rest my feet while enjoying the music. The gallery featured local artists, vibrant landscapes, abstract compositions, portraits, and sculptures. I moved slowly from piece to piece, paying more attention to art than I had in years. One painting in particular captured my interest, a street scene of San Miguel that somehow conveyed not just the physical reality of the place, but the feeling of being there, the quality of light, the sense of history and possibility coexisting. "You have good taste," said a voice behind me. I turned to find a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. "Graciela Fuentes is one of our finest local talents." "It's beautiful," I replied. "She captures something beyond just the visual." He nodded approvingly. "Exactly so. Are you an artist yourself?" The question caught me off guard. "Me? No, not at all. I work in publishing, editing mostly." "Ah, so you work with words rather than images. But you have an eye." He introduced himself as Daniel, the gallery owner, and began telling me about the San Miguel art scene, its history as a haven for creative expatriates, the current community of painters, sculptors, and craftspeople. "We have open studio days the first weekend of each month," he explained. "Artists across town welcome visitors to see their workspaces and methods. It's quite special." "That sounds wonderful," I said, realizing I would be gone by then. My 2-week escape had definite boundaries. Real life, with all its complications and betrayals, was waiting for me back home. Daniel must have seen something change in my expression. But there are always artists happy to share their process informally. "Are you here long?" "Just 2 weeks," I replied. "A short time, but enough to get a taste of San Miguel. If you're interested in seeing an artist at work, I can make a recommendation." I thought of Elena's invitation and the napkin still in my pocket. "Actually, I met someone this morning who invited me to her studio." "Elena Rojas?" Daniel's face lit up. "Elena, of course. You couldn't find a better guide to the art world. Here. She's remarkable. Didn't begin painting until her 50s after her husband died, but her work now hangs in collections worldwide." The information surprised me. Elena had seemed so assured, so established in her identity as an artist. I'd assumed she'd been painting all her life. She started in her 50s? I asked. Indeed. She likes to say she lived one life as an accountant, and now she's living another as an artist. Daniel smiled. She's proof it's never too late. To discover a new passion. His words stayed with me as I left the gallery and found a small restaurant for dinner. I sat at a table on a balcony overlooking a quiet street, ordered chile rellenos and a glass of wine, and watched as the town transformed in the golden hour of approaching sunset. Elena had reinvented herself in her 50s, after decades in a completely different field. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it suggested new beginnings were possible at any age. Unsettling because it forced me to confront how firmly I'd settled into the identity I'd constructed. Responsible Helen, reliable Helen, Helen who had sacrificed her own dreams to help raise Diana after their mother died. What dreams had those been, exactly? I struggled to remember. There had been a vague notion of traveling, of seeing the world beyond the city where I'd grown up. There had been a half-formed idea about writing a book someday, though I'd never taken concrete steps toward that goal. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped imagining futures for myself. I'd become so focused on helping Diana achieve her potential that I'd neglected to develop my own. And then, when she was grown and launched into her adult life, I'd channeled that same energy into my marriage, into creating a perfect home, and being the supportive wife to a husband with ambitions. Now Diana was marrying that husband, and I was alone in Mexico, contemplating a life I'd never fully lived. The waiter brought my food, interrupting these thoughts. I thanked him and turned my attention to the meal, which was delicious. The poblano pepper perfectly charred, the cheese filling creamy and flavorful, the rice and beans simple but satisfying. As I ate, I watched an elderly couple at a nearby table. They were clearly locals, dressed elegantly but comfortably, sharing a meal in companionable silence punctuated by occasional comments that made them both smile. There was an ease between them, a quiet contentment that spoke of years of shared experience. I tried to imagine Jacob and Diana reaching that stage, gray-haired, still finding joy in each other's company decades later. The thought brought a twinge of pain, but not the sharp agony I would have expected. It was more like pressing on a bruise that had already begun to heal. Perhaps it wasn't Jacob himself I mourned, but the future I'd thought we were building together. The comfortable retirement, the grandchildren we might have had, the security of growing old with someone who knew my history. But had Jacob ever really known me? Had I known myself? After dinner, I walked back to my hotel through streets now, illuminated by wrought iron lamps and the warm glow from restaurant windows. Musicians played in the main square, their melodies drifting through the evening air. Couples danced, children chased each other around the bandstand, old men played chess at stone tables. I paused to watch, feeling simultaneously part of the scene and separate from it, a witness to a community I wasn't fully integrated into, yet not entirely outside of either. It was an in-between state that mirrored my current life situation, caught between the identity I'd always had and whatever might come next. Back in my hotel room, I found myself reluctant to check my phone again. Instead, I opened the small journal I'd packed on impulse and began to write. Not about Diana or Jacob or the wedding I wouldn't attend, but about San Miguel. I described the colors, the sounds, the feel of cobblestones beneath my feet, the taste of my dinner, the musicians in the square. The act of putting words on paper was soothing, a way of processing the day that required me to pay attention to details I might otherwise have missed. I wrote until my eyes grew heavy, then closed the journal and prepared for bed. That night, I dreamed of painting, vivid colors flowing from my hands onto canvas, creating images that shifted and changed. Even as I worked on them, I woke feeling oddly energized, with a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. After breakfast, I pulled Elena's address from my pocket and set out to find her studio. San Miguel's streets didn't follow an orderly grid, and I got turned around more than once, but eventually I found the building, a 3-story structure with a heavy wooden door painted deep blue. I pressed the buzzer beside a small plaque that read, Rojas Studio, and moments later, Elena's voice came through the intercom. Yes? It's Helen Clark. We met yesterday at Hotel Casa Rosada. You invited me to visit your studio? Ah, Helen. Come up, come up. The door buzzed, and I pushed it open to find a cool, dim entryway with a tiled floor and a staircase winding upward. I climbed to the 3rd floor, where Elena waited in an open doorway, dressed in loose linen clothes splattered with paint. Welcome, she said, ushering me into a large, light-filled space with high ceilings and windows that offered a view of the town and hills beyond. Easels, canvases, and work tables occupied the center of the room, while finished paintings hung on the walls or leaned in stacks against them. This is incredible, I said, turning slowly to take it all in. My sanctuary, Elena replied. Coffee? Tea? I always need something while I work. I accepted coffee, and she led me to a small kitchenette in the corner of the studio. As she prepared the drinks, I wandered among the paintings, drawn to their vibrant colors and powerful composition. They were primarily landscapes and portraits, but with an expressionist quality that elevated them beyond mere representation. These are remarkable, I told her honestly. I met Daniel at the gallery yesterday, and he told me you only began painting in your 50s. Elena handed me a steaming mug and nodded. After my husband died, 30 years of marriage, most of it good, and then suddenly I was alone. I didn't know who I was without him. So you came to San Miguel? I came to run away, she corrected gently. I stayed to find myself. We settled in a corner with comfortable chairs, the morning light streaming through the windows, painting, patterns on the wooden floor. Tell me about the woman you were before, I said. Before San Miguel, before painting. Elena smiled, a faraway look in her eyes. Responsible, careful. I managed other people's money and made sure every cent was accounted for. I wore suits in sensible colors. I had a retirement plan and a mortgage that I paid off 2 years early. The description hit uncomfortably close to home. What changed? Besides your husband's death, I mean. I realized I'd been living his life, not mine. She set her coffee down. Carlos was a wonderful man in many ways, but his dreams became my dreams. His needs shaped our days. When he was gone, I looked around at the life we'd built and realized almost none of it reflected who I was apart from him. So you left everything behind? Not immediately. First, I tried to keep living the same life, just without him. I went to the same restaurants, attended the same social functions, maintained the same routines. It was like wearing clothes that no longer fit. She leaned forward. Then one day, I was walking past an art supply store. I'd never painted, never even considered it. But something made me go inside. She gestured around the studio. 3 years later, here I am. Different city, different career, different... Elena. Weren't you scared? I asked. Terrified, she admitted. But I was more afraid of spending whatever years I had left as a shadow of someone else's life. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Elena showed me her current projects, explained her techniques, and shared stories of her journey from accountant to artist. As our conversation wound down, she surprised me with a question. Would you like to try? Try what? I asked. Painting. She gestured toward an empty easel. Sometimes we need to create something new to understand what's been there all along. I laughed nervously. I haven't picked up a paintbrush since elementary school art class? Perfect. No bad habits. To unlearn. She was already moving toward a storage cabinet, pulling out a blank canvas, brushes, and tubes of paint. "You're not committing to a career change, just to an afternoon of exploration." Before I could formulate a reasonable objection, I found myself standing before an easel, paintbrush in hand, staring at a blank canvas while Elena arranged colors on a palette beside me. "Don't overthink it," she advised. "Start with a color that speaks to you and make a mark, any mark. The canvas is yours. There are no mistakes, only discoveries." I dipped my brush into a deep blue, hesitated, then drew a curved line across the canvas. The sensation was oddly satisfying. The slight resistance of brush against canvas, the way the paint flowed, leaving a trail of color behind. "Good," Elena said. "Now another." Time seemed to shift as I added more lines, more colors. Elena offered occasional guidance: how to mix colors, how to create texture, how to use the brush to achieve different effects. Mostly, though, she let me experiment, discovering through trial and error what worked and what didn't. When I finally stepped back to look at what I'd created, I was surprised. It wasn't great art by any standard. The perspective was awkward. The colors didn't quite harmonize. The composition lacked focus. But there was something in it, a quality of expression that felt authentically mine. "What do you see?" Elena asked, standing beside me. "A mess," I replied honestly. "But an interesting mess." She smiled. "The first step of any journey begins with an interesting mess. The question is, do you want to continue the journey?" Did I? The afternoon had passed in a state of flow I rarely experienced in my daily life. I'd been completely present, focused on the act of creation, rather than the swirl of thoughts about Diana, Jacob, and the wedding. For a few hours, I'd forgotten to be Helen Clark, the betrayed sister and ex-wife. I'd just been a woman making marks on canvas, discovering a new form of expression. "I think I do," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Good. Same time tomorrow, then." Elena began cleaning brushes. Bring comfortable clothes. Paint tends to find its way onto everything. As I walked back to my hotel in the late afternoon light, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. The burden of always being the person others expected me to be, perhaps. Or the burden of defining myself through my relationships to others, rather than through my own experiences and choices. For the first time since finding that misdelivered wedding invitation, I wasn't primarily thinking about what I'd lost. Instead, I was contemplating what I might discover. About San Miguel, about painting, about myself. That evening, I finally turned my phone back on, bracing for the onslaught of messages. There were more missed calls, more texts asking where I was, expressing concern or frustration at my silence. The most recent was from Diana. "Helen, Dad is really worried. At least let us know you're safe." I composed a brief message. "I'm fine. I'm taking some time for myself in Mexico. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." Then I switched the phone off again, returned to my journal, and began writing about my day in Elena's studio. The feel of the brush in my hand, the way colors blended and separated, the curious sense of recognition I'd felt when looking at my finished painting, as if I'd caught a glimpse of a self I hadn't known existed. Tomorrow I would paint again, and perhaps, brushstroke by brushstroke, I would begin to create not just an image on canvas, but a new vision of who Helen Clark might become. After a week in San Miguel, I fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and somehow right. Mornings began with coffee in the hotel courtyard, often shared with Elena, who had taken to stopping by before heading to her studio. We'd discuss the day's plans, what techniques she wanted to teach me, which galleries we might visit, where to find the best chiles en nogada or barbacoa tacos. The simple pleasure of these conversations, casual, unhurried, focused on immediate joys rather than distant obligations, Felt like a luxury I'd denied myself for years. Back home, breakfast had become a functional affair, something to get through efficiently before tackling the day's responsibilities. Here, it was an experience to savor. On my 8th morning in Mexico, Elena arrived at my hotel carrying a small, wrapped package, which she placed beside my coffee cup with a mysterious smile. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it and see." Inside was a set of professional-grade watercolors in a portable metal case, along with fine brushes and a small sketchbook bound in leather. "Elena, I can't accept this. It's too much." She waved. Away, my protest. "Tools matter. You can't discover if you have a gift for painting using children's supplies." She tapped the sketchbook. "This is for when you're wandering the streets. When you see something that moves you, stop and capture it, not with a tourist's photograph, but with your own hand." I ran my fingers over the smooth leather cover, oddly touched by her belief in abilities I wasn't sure I possessed. "Thank you. I'll try to do it justice." "It's not about doing justice to the tools," she corrected gently. "It's about using them to discover what's inside you." After breakfast, I followed Elena to her studio for what had become our daily painting session. Over the week, I'd progressed from tentative brushstrokes to more confident compositions. My work was still amateurish, perspective slightly off, colors sometimes muddied, but Elena insisted technical perfection wasn't the point. "Look at Frida Kahlo," she'd said yesterday, showing me a book of the famous Mexican artist's work. "Her power isn't in perfect technique, but in raw emotional truth. She painted her pain, her joy, her reality. Today, she set up a still life, a blue ceramic bowl filled with pomegranates, a half-empty wine glass, a tarnished silver candlestick. Paint what you see," she instructed, "but also what you feel when you look at these objects." I stared at the arrangement, uncertain how to translate feelings into visual form. The pomegranates with their leathery skin and jewel-like seeds reminded me of hidden potential, of beauty concealed until deliberately revealed. The wine glass, reflecting, light from the studio windows, spoke of celebration but also solitude. A single glass, partially consumed. The candlestick, once bright but now dulled with age, seemed to embody the passage of time. How to capture all that in paint? I began cautiously, sketching the basic shapes, then gradually adding color. As I worked, I found myself less concerned with perfect representation and more interested in the relationships between the objects. The way the deep red of the pomegranate seeds contrasted with the cool blue of the bowl. How the curved glass distorted the light, the subtle gradations of gray in the tarnished silver. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. When Elena suggested we break for lunch, I stepped back from my canvas, surprised by what I'd created. It wasn't exactly what I'd intended. The perspective was still slightly skewed, the colors more intense than in the actual objects. But it had a vitality that pleased me. "You're finding your voice," Elena said, examining my work. "See how you've emphasized the light on the wine glass? How the pomegranates dominate the composition. These aren't accidents. They're choices your subconscious made." We walked to a small restaurant a few blocks away, one of Elena's favorites, where the chef greeted her by name and ushered us to a table in a sunny corner. Over plates of enchiladas, verdes and glasses of horchata, our conversation turned unexpectedly personal. "Tell me about your sister," Elena said. "Not the betrayal, but who she was to you before." The question caught me off guard. I'd spent the week deliberately not thinking about Diana, Jacob, or the wedding. "Why do you want to know?" Elena shrugged. "Because relationships shape us, even, perhaps especially, the difficult ones, and because you've been painting around that pain rather than through it." I considered this as I took a bite of my enchilada, the tangy salsa verde momentarily distracting me from the discomfort of the question. Finally, I said, "Diana was 9 when our mother died. I was 21, just finishing college. My father was present, but overwhelmed. He worked long hours, and when he was home, he seemed lost without my mother. So you stepped in. Someone had to. I traced patterns in the condensation on my glass. Diana was struggling in school, having nightmares. My father suggested I postpone graduate school for a year to help her adjust. I gave a short laugh. 1 year turned into many. I got a job nearby instead of pursuing the fellowship I'd been offered in another state. I helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, made sure there were home-cooked meals. You became a surrogate mother. I tried to be a good sister, I corrected. But maybe the lines blurred. Diana resented it sometimes, being the one who needed help, having the older sister who was always there, always responsible. As she got older, she pushed back harder. In high school, she asked me to stop coming to school events, said it was embarrassing that other kids had real parents there. The memory still stung, even after all these years. When she got into Harvard, I was so proud. But then she accused me of being jealous because I'd given up my own education opportunities for her. That wasn't true. I was genuinely happy for her. Were you genuinely happy for yourself? Elena asked quietly. The question hung between us. Had I been? Or had I constructed a narrative where my sacrifices were noble, necessary, beyond question? A story that left no room for acknowledging my own disappointments and deferred dreams. I don't know, I admitted finally. I think I convinced myself that being the reliable one, the one who held everything together, was enough. Elena nodded, not offering easy reassurance or platitudes. And then Diana grew up, moved on, and you married Jacob. Yes, he was. Decisive, ambitious. He knew exactly what he wanted in life. I smiled faintly at the irony. I found that attractive after years of being the one making all the decisions for Diana and myself. It felt like I could finally relax, let someone else take the lead. But I think I just transferred my caretaking from Diana to Jacob. His career came first. His preferences shaped our life together. Even the house we bought, I would have preferred something smaller, closer to the park. He wanted the prestigious address, the formal dining room for entertaining colleagues. I shook my head. I went along with it all because that's what I'd trained myself to do. Accommodate, support, enable. And now Diana and Jacob are together, Elena said, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. The two people who most defined my adult life, who both in different ways took what I offered without really seeing me. Now they're building a life together, and I'm superfluous. Or finally free, Elena suggested. I looked up sharply. Free? To discover who Helen is when she's not defined by caring for a sister or supporting a husband. She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. Perhaps this betrayal, painful as it is also an opportunity. The idea was so startling that I didn't know how to respond. Could I really view the collapse of my family relationships as a doorway rather than a dead end? The thought followed me through the rest of lunch and back to the studio, where I returned to my painting with new perspective. Looking at the still life I'd created, I suddenly saw it differently. Not just as a technical exercise, but as a reflection of my current state. The pomegranates with their hidden seeds were like the parts of myself I'd kept concealed, even from my own awareness. The wine glass, solitary but catching the light, spoke of both isolation and illumination. The tarnished candlestick represented not just the passage of time but the dignity of having lived, having witnessed, having endured. I picked up my brush and began adding details I'd missed before. The subtle reflection of the pomegranates in the table's polished surface, the intricate pattern of tarnish on the silver, the precise way light refracted through the wine. As I worked, I felt a curious sense of alignment, as if my hand and eye and heart were finally working in concert. When I finished, Elena came to stand beside me, studying the painting in silence for a long moment. "There," she said finally, pointing to a small area where I'd captured the light passing through the wine glass, creating a ruby-tinted glow on the table. "That's Helen speaking." That evening, instead of returning directly to my hotel, I took my new sketchbook and watercolors to the main plaza. I found a bench beneath a laurel tree and opened the book to its first blank page. The scene before me was full of potential subjects. The magnificent church with its pink spires catching the last of the day's light, couples strolling arm in arm, vendors selling balloons and roasted corn, children chasing pigeons across the cobblestones. What caught my eye, though, was an elderly woman feeding birds from a small paper bag of crumbs. She sat alone, her face creased with time but serene, seemingly content in her solitary activity. I began to sketch her, trying to capture not just her physical appearance, but the quality of peaceful self-containment she projected. As the light faded, I added washes of color, the warm browns of her shawl, the deeper umber of her skin, the soft gray of her hair. The result was impressionistic rather than detailed, but it conveyed something essential about the woman and about what had drawn me to her. A shadow fell across my page, and I looked up to find the subject of my sketch standing before me, peering curiously at the book in my lap. "Soy yo?" she asked, pointing to the drawing. "Is that me?" I nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Yes, I hope you don't mind." She studied the watercolor, then smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had been. "Bonita," she said. "Beautiful." I tore the page carefully from the book and offered it to her. "Para usted," I said, using one of the few Spanish phrases I knew. "For you." She accepted the sketch with a small, formal bow, then reached into her bag of crumbs and sprinkled a few into my palm before walking away, her gift exchanged for mine. As I watched her go, a sense of contentment washed over me. Not happiness exactly, but something quieter and more sustainable. For the first time since arriving in San Miguel, I felt not just like a tourist observing from the outside, but like a participant in the life of this place, connected through the simple act of seeing and being seen. Back in my hotel room, I checked my phone for the first time in days. There were fewer messages now, just one from my father asking if I was safe, and one from a colleague at work checking on when I might return. Nothing from Diana or Jacob. Perhaps they'd given up trying to reach me, or perhaps they were too absorbed in wedding preparations to spare much thought for my absence. I responded to my father with a brief message. "I'm safe and well in Mexico. Taking some time to think. We'll be in touch soon." And to my colleague with an equally concise update about my return date. Then, instead of turning the phone off as I'd done every night since arriving, I set it aside, no longer feeling the need to entirely disconnect from my old life in order to explore this new one. That night, I dreamed of painting again, but this time I wasn't alone in my dream studio. The elderly woman from the plaza was there, and Elena, and other faces I'd encountered in San Miguel. They moved around me as I worked, occasionally offering a suggestion or a word of encouragement, creating a sense of community that had been absent from my life for longer than I cared to admit. I woke feeling surprisingly refreshed, with an idea forming that I wasn't sure I had the courage to pursue. After breakfast, I walked to Elena's studio, sketchbook tucked under my arm. "I have a question," I said after she let me in. "The open studio event you mentioned, where artists show their work process to visitors. How does one participate in that?" Elena looked surprised. "Are you thinking of showing your work?" "Not exactly. I was thinking more about demonstrating, the process of learning to paint as an older woman with no prior experience." I hesitated, uncertain how to articulate what I was envisioning. Like a journal in real time. "Interesting," Elena said, pouring coffee for us both. You mean setting up a space where visitors could see your progression, from your first attempts to your current work, and watch you actively learning? Yes, exactly. Not presenting myself as an accomplished artist, but as someone in the middle of discovery, someone starting over. The idea gained clarity as I spoke. So many people feel trapped in lives they've outgrown. Maybe seeing someone else mid-transformation would inspire them. Elena considered this, head tilted thoughtfully. It's unconventional for the open studio event. Usually it's established artists showing their methods. She smiled suddenly. Which is exactly why we should do it. Breaking expectations is good for the soul, yours and the visitors. We? I asked. Of course, my studio has plenty of space. We could set up a corner for you, display your progression so far, and have you working on something new during the event. Her eyes lit with enthusiasm. We could frame it as a special exhibition, beginning again, the art of reinvention. Or something like that. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. Do you really think anyone would be interested? Helen, Elena said with gentle firmness, your story is one that resonates with many people, especially women of our generation. The details differ, but the essential experience of having shaped your life around others' needs and then needing to rediscover yourself, that's universal. Over the next few days, the idea evolved from a vague concept into a concrete plan. Elena rearranged her studio to create a dedicated space for what we now called the Reinvention Project. We selected examples of my work from the past week, arranged chronologically to show progression. Elena helped me frame them simply, transforming tentative practice pieces into a coherent visual narrative. I continued painting daily, but with a new purpose, not just learning techniques, but developing a body of work that expressed something authentic about my journey. I created a series of small watercolors depicting scenes from San Miguel, each capturing a moment or interaction that had touched me in some way. The elderly woman feeding birds, musicians in the plaza, a young couple stealing a kiss in the shelter of a doorway, the riot of bougainvillea cascading over a sun-baked wall. Alongside these external observations, I began a more personal series, abstract compositions that attempted to translate emotional states into visual form. One used cool blues and grays to evoke the isolation I'd felt upon discovering Diana and Jacob's betrayal. Another, in warm oranges and golds, captured the sense of possibility that was gradually replacing that initial despair. As I worked, I kept a journal documenting not just technical challenges and breakthroughs, but the internal shifts accompanying them. This would be displayed alongside the paintings, offering viewers insight into the connection between artistic and personal development. 3 days before the open studio event, I received a text from Diana. The wedding is in 2 days. Last chance to be part of this. Jacob and I both wish you could see past your hurt and be there for us. The message landed like a stone in the calm pool of my new existence. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, phone in hand, unexpected tears blurring my vision. After all this time, after the deliberate exclusion and casual cruelty, they were still framing my absence as a personal failing, my inability to see past my hurt, rather than a reasonable response to their betrayal. I typed several replies, deleting each one before sending. What could I possibly say that would penetrate the narrative they'd constructed? That would make them understand that this wasn't about jealousy or bitterness, but about basic respect and consideration? In the end, I sent nothing. Instead, I picked up my sketchbook and walked to the plaza, finding a quiet corner where I could sit and draw. As my pencil moved across the paper, capturing the intricate facade of the cathedral in the fading afternoon light, I felt the knot of emotion gradually loosen. Diana and Jacob would marry in 2 days, with or without my blessing. Their story would unfold according to its own logic, shaped by choices I couldn't control. Meanwhile, I was here in this beautiful town, creating something new from the raw materials of my disrupted life. Both realities existed simultaneously, neither canceling out the other. That evening, I returned to Elena's studio to continue preparing for the open studio event. She noticed my subdued mood immediately. "What happened?" she asked, setting aside the sign she'd been painting announcing the reinvention project. I showed her Diana's text. "The wedding is day after tomorrow." Elena studied me thoughtfully. "How does that make you feel?" "Sad," I admitted. "Not because I want to be there, I don't, but because even now, they can't acknowledge how their actions affected me. It's all about what I should be doing for them, never about what they did to me." "Some people never develop the capacity to truly see others," Elena said. "They remain the centers of their own universes, with everyone else orbiting around them." "Diana wasn't always like that," I said softly. "When she was little, she was so attuned to others' feelings. She'd notice if I was sad or stressed and try to comfort me, even though she was just a child herself." "What changed, do you think?" I considered this question, trying to pinpoint when my sensitive little sister had transformed into someone capable of dating her sister's ex-husband in secret, then excluding that sister from her wedding. "I'm not sure," I said finally. "Maybe it was going away to college, being in that hyper-competitive environment where self-promotion is rewarded. Maybe it was the way our father and Vivian indulged her after she graduated, treating every achievement as exceptional. Or maybe," Elena suggested gently, "it was having an older sister who sacrificed so much that Diana came to believe such sacrifice was her due, that others should naturally reorganize their lives around her needs and desires." The observation stung, but I couldn't dismiss it entirely. Had my devotion to Diana's well-being ultimately enabled her self-centeredness? Had my willingness to put her first taught her to expect the same from everyone? "I never meant to teach her that," I said. "Of course not, but lessons are often transmitted without conscious intention." Elena squeezed my shoulder comfortingly. "The good news is that you're breaking that pattern now. You're showing her and yourself that your life has value and purpose independent of hers. Even if she never sees it that way? Even then. Because this isn't really about Diana anymore, is it? It's about you discovering who Helen is when she's not defined by her relationships to others." The day of the open studio event dawned clear and warm. I woke early, a flutter of anticipation in my stomach that was equal parts excitement and apprehension. In a few hours, strangers would be viewing my work, asking questions, watching me paint. The idea that had seemed so promising when discussing it with Elena now felt presumptuous. Who was I to present myself as an artist, even one in the early stages of development? I shared these doubts with Elena when I arrived at her studio. She listened patiently, then handed me a cup of coffee. "Do you know how many people never try something new because they're afraid of not being instantly good at it?" she asked. "How many potential artists, writers, musicians never emerge because they can't bear the vulnerability of being a beginner?" "Probably most people," I admitted. "Exactly. So by simply showing up today, by sharing your learning process openly, you're doing something radical. You're giving others permission to begin their own journeys, whatever those might be." Her words calmed my nerves somewhat. We spent the morning making final adjustments to the display, hanging the last of my framed pieces, arranging my journal pages on a small reading table, setting up an easel where I would work during the event. At noon, Elena opened the studio. Doors and visitors began to arrive, a steady stream of tourists, expatriates, and locals curious about the art being created in their midst. Most went first to Elena's main exhibition space, admiring her established work, but gradually people found their way to my corner. I sat at my easel, working on a new painting, a view of the courtyard at my hotel, with its central fountain, and potted bougainvillea. As I mixed colors and applied them to the canvas, I became aware of people gathering behind me, watching silently or murmuring comments to one another. A woman about my age paused beside the chronological display of my work, studying each piece in turn. She read the accompanying journal excerpts, then approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to tell you how much your project speaks to me." I set down my brush. "Thank you. That's very kind." "No, I mean it literally speaks to me, to my situation." She gestured to her husband, who was examining one of Elena's landscapes across the room. "We're here on vacation, but also trying to figure out our next chapter. Tom's retiring next year, and I've spent 3 decades as a high school administrator. We're both a little terrified of what comes next." She looked at my paintings again. "Seeing your progression, reading about your journey, it makes the idea of starting over seem less daunting." Throughout the afternoon, similar conversations unfolded. A retired lawyer considering a second career in photography, a widower learning to cook for the first time, a woman who had recently left a decades-long corporate job to open a small bookshop. Each saw something in my humble display that resonated with their own experiences of transition and reinvention. Some asked technical questions about painting that I could barely answer, being such a novice myself. Others wanted to know more about my personal story, how I'd found myself in San Miguel, what had prompted my artistic exploration. I shared selectively, offering the general outline without the specific details of Diana and Jacob's betrayal. By the time the open studio event ended at 6, I was both exhausted and exhilarated. Elena and I celebrated with glasses of wine on the small balcony adjoining her studio, watching as the town below was gradually illuminated by streetlights and warm glows from windows. "Well?" she asked. "How does it feel to be a public artist?" I laughed. "I'm not sure that's an accurate description, but it feels significant, like I've crossed some threshold I didn't even know was there." "You have," she affirmed. "Sharing creative work is an act of courage, especially when the work is so connected to personal vulnerability. You showed up today as authentically Helen, not as someone's sister or ex-wife or employee, just you, with all your uncertainties and discoveries." "It was easier than I expected," I admitted. Once I started talking with people and realized they weren't judging me for being imperfect or inexperienced. Most people respond to authenticity with recognition rather than judgment. It's our own inner critics who are the harshest. Elena refilled our glasses. "So, what's next for the reinvention project?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on preparing for the open studio event that I hadn't thought beyond it. "I'm not sure. I fly home in 3 days. And then?" "Back to my job, I suppose. Though even that feels different now." I took a sip of wine, considering. I've been editing other people's words for so long. Maybe it's time to see if I have words of my own worth sharing. "Writing as well as painting?" Elena smiled. "The reinvention expands. Maybe. Or maybe just living more consciously, making choices based on what I want rather than what others expect." I looked out at the town, now a constellation of lights against the darkening sky. That would be reinvention enough for now. We sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping wine and watching night settle over San Miguel. Eventually, Elena said, "You know you can come back any time. This town has a way of claiming people." "I've noticed," I replied, thinking of the expatriates I'd met over the past 2 weeks, people who had come for a vacation and stayed for years, drawn by the beauty, the artistic community, the pace of life that encouraged presence rather than perpetual striving. "Just something to consider," Elena said lightly. "Your life doesn't have to return to exactly what it was before." The thought stayed with me as I walked back to my hotel through streets now familiar enough that I navigated them without consulting a map. San Miguel had worked its way into my consciousness, becoming more than just a temporary escape. In this place that had initially been nowhere, I had found something I hadn't even known I was missing. A sense of possibility unconstrained by others' expectations or my own habitual limitations. In my hotel room, I checked my phone one last time before bed. There was a new message from Diana, sent just an hour ago. "We missed you today. The rehearsal dinner was beautiful. Dad gave a toast that made everyone cry. I kept thinking you should have been there to hear it." I stared at the screen, trying to decode the subtext. Was this genuine regret, or another attempt to make me feel guilty for not setting aside my own feelings to support her? Either way, it felt like a message from a different world, one that was rapidly receding from my immediate concerns. For the first time, I considered the possibility of not returning at the end of my scheduled 2 weeks, of extending my stay in San Miguel, perhaps indefinitely. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. Could I really remake my life so completely? Leave behind the familiar routines, the job security, the apartment filled with memories both good and painful? I didn't have an answer yet, but the fact that I was asking the question at all represented a profound shift. 2 weeks ago, I had fled to Mexico in pain and confusion, seeking only temporary escape from an unbearable situation. Now, I was contemplating choices that would have seemed unthinkable then. Whatever I decided, I knew one thing with certainty. I was no longer the woman who had opened that misdelivered wedding invitation and felt her world collapse. That Helen still existed somewhere within me, but she was being gradually transformed, stroke by brush stroke, choice by choice, into someone new. Someone whose worth wasn't tied to her usefulness to others. Someone who could create rather than merely support. Someone who might, in time, thank Diana and Jacob for the betrayal that had forced her to finally claim her own life. The day of Diana and Jacob's wedding arrived with infuriating perfection. Clear skies, mild temperature, the kind of day brides pray for. I woke early, a strange hollowness in my chest that wasn't quite pain but something adjacent to it. Somewhere, across the ocean, my sister was probably already surrounded by bridesmaids, having her hair styled, sipping champagne. My father would be checking his speech cards nervously. Jacob would be straightening his bow tie, perhaps practicing his vows in the mirror. And I was here in San Miguel de Allende, thousands of miles away, excluded and yet somehow free. I dressed. Slowly, choosing clothes with more care than usual. A flowing linen dress in deep turquoise that I'd purchased from a local boutique, silver earrings from a street vendor. Today marked not just Diana and Jacob's union, but also, in a way, my own independence. It seemed fitting to acknowledge both transitions. Rather than sitting in my hotel room dwelling on what was happening back home, I packed my watercolors and sketchbook and headed out into the streets. The town was already alive with Saturday activity. Vendors setting up stalls in the market, tourists gathering for guided walks, locals going about their weekend routines. I found myself drawn to a part of town I hadn't yet explored, a residential area where the facades were less polished than in the historic center, but no less vibrant. Children played in a small park, their shouts and laughter carrying on the morning air. An old man swept the sidewalk in front of his home with methodical care. A woman watered potted plants on her tiny balcony, nodding to me as I passed below. Life continuing in all its ordinary glory, utterly disconnected from the drama that had consumed my world just weeks ago. I settled on a low wall overlooking a narrow street where laundry hung from lines stretched between buildings, adding unintentional but beautiful notes of color to the scene. Opening my sketchbook, I began to draw, not just the physical landscape, but the feeling of the place, the sense of lives being lived with dignity and purpose regardless of circumstance. As I worked, an elderly woman emerged from a nearby doorway and watched me curiously for a moment before approaching. "Buenos dias," she said. "Le gusta nuestra calle?" "Good morning. Do you like our street?" My Spanish was still rudimentary, picked up from Elena and from an app I'd downloaded after my first week in town, but I managed to reply, Sí, es muy hermosa. Tiene carácter. Yes, it's very beautiful. It has character. She beamed, pleased, by either my appreciation or my attempt at her language. Soy Carmen, she introduced herself. Helen, I responded, gesturing to the empty space beside me on the wall. ¿Quieres sentarte? Would you like to sit? Carmen settled next to me, watching as I continued sketching. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, she asked in careful English, You are artist? I smiled. No, aprendiendo. Learning. Ah. She nodded approvingly. Nunca es tarde. It's never too late. We sat together for nearly an hour, Carmen occasionally pointing out details I might have missed. A particularly charming arrangement of flower pots, the distinctive ironwork on a balcony, the way light caught the edge of a red tile roof. Though, our conversation was limited by language barriers. There was a peaceful connection in this shared observation, this mutual appreciation of beauty in the ordinary. When I finished my sketch, I showed it to her. She studied it, then patted my hand approvingly. Ves con el corazón. You see with the heart. I repeated the phrase, committing it to memory, feeling it was somehow important. Ves con el corazón. Carmen nodded, then reached into the pocket of her apron and withdrew a small object, a tiny carved wooden bird, painted in bright blues and yellows. She pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it. Para recordar, she said, to remember. I tried to refuse the gift, but she was insistent. I finally accepted with a thank you, touched by the generosity of this woman who had known me for less than an hour. In return, I carefully removed the finished sketch from my book and offered it to her. Carmen took it with formal grace, holding it as if it were precious. Gracias, Helen. Vuelve pronto. Thank you, Helen. Come back soon. As I walked away, I found myself hoping I might indeed come back to this neighborhood, perhaps see Carmen again and improve enough in Spanish to have a real conversation with her. The thought surprised me. It presumed a future connection to San Miguel beyond my scheduled departure in 2 days. In my time here, something fundamental had shifted. What had begun as a desperate escape from pain had evolved into a genuine attachment to this place, these people, this emerging version of myself. The idea of simply returning to my old life now felt impossible, like trying to step back into clothes I'd long outgrown. By mid-morning, I arrived at Elena's studio, where we'd arranged to meet for coffee before a trip to a nearby town known for its traditional ceramics. She greeted me with the customary kiss on each cheek, then studied my face with the directness I'd come to appreciate. Today is the wedding, she said. Not a question. I nodded. Yes. And how do you feel? I considered the question seriously, wanting to be honest with both her and myself. Strange, I admitted finally. Like I'm watching a play I was originally cast in but then written out of. I can picture exactly what's happening right now, but I'm disconnected from it. And the strangest part is that I don't wish I were there. Elena poured coffee for us both. That's significant. Not wanting to be included in something that, just weeks ago, would have seemed unthinkable to miss. I think if I were there, I'd be playing a role. The supportive sister, the gracious ex-wife. Here, I'm just me. Still figuring out what that means, but no longer defined by my relationship to them. Exactly. Elena handed me a cup. Now, shall we focus on something entirely different? I promise the ceramics in San Jose are worth the drive. We spent the day exploring the neighboring town, visiting studios where artisans created pottery using techniques passed down through generations. I watched, fascinated, as an older woman shaped clay on a wheel with hands gnarled by age, but incredibly precise in their movements. My grandmother taught me, she explained through Elena's translation. And her grandmother taught her. The clay remembers our hands, and our hands remember the clay. I bought a small bowl from her, drawn to its imperfect symmetry and the deep blue glaze that reminded me of twilight. It wasn't a practical purchase. The bowl would have to be carefully packed for my flight home, but it felt important to have a tangible reminder of this day, this choice to fill my wedding day hours with beauty and discovery rather than resentment or regret. On the drive back to San Miguel, Elena asked about my plans. "You leave the day after tomorrow, yes?" "That was the original plan," I acknowledged. "But I've been thinking about extending my stay. Not indefinitely, but perhaps another week or two." Elena smiled. "I had a feeling you might. San Miguel has that effect. It invites people to linger, to let its rhythms work on them a little longer." "It's not just the place," I said. "It's what's happening to me here. I've started something, with painting, with this whole process of rediscovery, and it doesn't feel finished yet." "Creative journeys rarely have neat endpoints," Elena observed. "They're more like spirals, continuously unfolding." Back in town, we parted ways at the plaza, Elena heading to meet friends for dinner, me opting for solitude on this day that held such complicated significance. I found a small restaurant with a rooftop terrace overlooking the cathedral and ordered a glass of wine and a simple meal of chiles rellenos. As dusk fell and lights began to twinkle across the town, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. By now, Diana and Jacob's ceremony would be over. They would be at their reception, sharing their first dance, cutting the cake, moving through the rituals that marked the beginning of their life together. I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to their happiness, which I wasn't quite generous, enough to wish for wholeheartedly, but to the unpredictable turns of fate that had brought me here to this terrace, this moment of quiet autonomy, this unexpected second beginning. After dinner, I walked back to my hotel through streets filled with Saturday night energy, music spilling from restaurants, couples strolling hand in hand, artists displaying their work along pedestrian thoroughfares. The vibrancy of it all reinforced my inclination to stay longer. There was still so much of San Miguel to discover, both the physical place and what it was revealing in me. In my room, I reluctantly turned on my phone, bracing for whatever messages the wedding day might have generated. There were several: a photo from a family friend who didn't know I hadn't attended, showing Diana radiant in her gown with my father beside her, a text from my father simply saying, "Wish you were here," and most surprisingly, a voicemail from Jacob. I hesitated before playing it, not sure I wanted his voice intruding on the peace I'd cultivated. Curiosity finally won out. His message was brief, his tone slurred slightly as if he'd been drinking. "Helen, it's Jacob. The wedding's over. Everyone keeps asking where you are. Your father's upset, though he's trying not to show it. Diana's pretending she doesn't care, but I know she does. I wanted to explain about us. It wasn't what you think. We didn't." There was a long pause, then, "Anyway, call me when you get this. We should talk." I deleted the message without saving it. Whatever explanation he wanted to offer now, whether sincere or self-serving, it came too late to change anything. The wedding had happened. My exclusion was complete. And most importantly, I was moving in a direction that no longer centered them. I sent brief responses to my father and the family friend, then switched off my phone again and returned to my sketchbook. The day had provided rich material: the residential street with its laundry lines and flower pots, the ceramics workshop with its ancient traditions, the rooftop view of San Miguel at dusk. As I sketched, I thought about Carmen's words. "Ves con el corazón." You see with the heart. Perhaps that was what had begun to change in me here. Not just learning technical skills for capturing the world visually, but developing a different way of seeing, one that went beyond surface appearances to the essence of things. The next morning, I woke with a clear decision. I would extend my stay in San Miguel by 2 weeks. I'd already accumulated enough vacation time to cover it, and The additional cost seemed a worthwhile investment in whatever transformation was underway. After breakfast, I called my boss back in the States to request the extension. To my surprise, she was immediately supportive. "You haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years, Helen. If you need more time, take it. The Frankfurt manuscript is progressing well with Jenna handling it, and nothing else is urgent." Next, I contacted the hotel about extending my reservation. Fortunately, my room was available for another week, though I would need to move to a different one for the final week. With those practical matters settled, I headed to Elena's studio to share my decision. She was working on a large canvas when I arrived, music playing softly in the background. She greeted me with a smile that suggested she already knew what I was going to say. "I'm staying 2 more weeks," I confirmed. "Excellent." She set down her brush. "In that case, I have a proposition for you. The municipality is sponsoring a small exhibition next month. New Visions, it's called. Local artists presenting work that represents fresh perspectives or approaches. I've been invited to submit pieces, and I'd like to include your reinvention project." I stared at her, certain I'd misunderstood. "But I won't be here next month, and I'm not a real artist." Elena waved away both objections. "The exhibition opens in 3 weeks, so installation would happen during your extended stay. And as for not being a real artist, what does that even mean? You're creating visual art that expresses authentic human experience. That's as real as it gets." "But my work is so amateur," I protested. "That's precisely why it's valuable for this exhibition. Your project isn't about technical perfection. It's about the courage to begin something new at a stage in life when many people believe it's too late for significant change." She looked at me intently. "The reinvention project speaks to something universal, Helen. I saw it during the open studio day, how people responded to your journey, how they recognized their own potential in your experience." I felt simultaneously flattered and terrified. What would I need to do? Continue what? You're already doing. Painting, journaling about the process, developing your visual voice. We'd select pieces that show your progression and create an installation that invites viewers to witness and perhaps join in the journey of reinvention. The idea was both thrilling and daunting. To have my work, my still developing, imperfect work, displayed in a real exhibition seemed presumptuous. Yet Elena's belief in the value of my process was unwavering. "Think about it," she said, seeing my hesitation. "You don't need to decide immediately." But as I left her studio and walked through the sun-drenched streets of San Miguel, I found myself already imagining how such an installation might be arranged, what pieces would best illustrate the transformation I was experiencing, what I might write to accompany them. By the time I reached the plaza, my decision was made. I would participate in the exhibition, regardless of my insecurities. I spent the day sketching in various locations around town, my awareness heightened by the knowledge that these images might eventually be seen by strangers. In late afternoon, I returned to Elena's studio. "I'll do it," I said simply. She smiled. "I knew you would. Your courage is one of your most compelling qualities, Helen." "I don't feel particularly courageous," I admitted. "Most of the time, I feel like I'm just stumbling forward, making it up as I go along." "That's what courage often looks like from the inside," Elena replied. "It's rarely the bold, certain stride we imagine. More often, it's exactly that, stumbling forward despite doubt and fear." For the next several days, I divided my time between exploring San Miguel and working intensively on pieces for the exhibition. Elena guided me gently, suggesting techniques and approaches but always emphasizing that my unique perspective was what mattered most. "Technical skill can be developed over time," she said. "Authentic voice is the rarer quality." On the evening before my originally scheduled departure date, I received an unexpected text from Diana. "Helen, where are you? Dad says you're in Mexico? We need to talk about what happens now." Jacob and I are back from our honeymoon next week. The message struck me as oddly presumptuous, as if my location required explanation, as if their return created some obligation for me. It was a subtle reminder of the dynamic I'd left behind, where family expectations superseded personal boundaries. I replied briefly, "Yes, I'm in Mexico. I've extended my stay for a couple more weeks. We can talk when I return." Her response came quickly. "Weeks? What about your job? Your apartment? Are you just abandoning everything because you're upset with us?" This time, I didn't respond immediately. The accusation of abandoning everything seemed particularly ironic, coming from someone who had excluded me from her wedding. Moreover, it revealed an assumption that my life revolved entirely around work and home, as if creativity, exploration, and personal growth weren't valid priorities. After careful consideration, I wrote back, "I'm not abandoning anything, Diana. I'm discovering new aspects of myself. My job is secure, and my apartment will be waiting when I return. This isn't about being upset with you. It's about choosing what's right for me right now." She didn't reply that night. I imagined her reading my message with confusion, perhaps even irritation. The Helen she knew, reliable, predictable, accommodating, wouldn't extend a vacation on impulse or prioritize self-discovery over responsibilities. She wouldn't agree to participate in an art exhibition with no formal training or credentials. But that version of Helen was receding day by day, like a tide gradually pulling back from the shore. The following morning, I moved to my new room, smaller than the previous one, but with a tiny private terrace overlooking the hotel's courtyard. I arranged my few possessions, placing Carmen's carved wooden bird on the windowsill and the blue ceramic bowl on the bedside table, surrounding myself with these tangible reminders of connections formed and choices made. A text arrived from my father. "Diana says you're staying in Mexico longer. Is everything all right? We're worried about you." The concern seemed genuine, but I detected an undercurrent of bewilderment, perhaps even disapproval. My behavior didn't fit the established pattern. It wasn't logical or practical or oriented toward others' needs. Of course they were worried, not necessarily for my safety, but for the disruption to the family system my changes represented. "I'm perfectly fine," I assured him. "Just taking some extra time to explore. I've started painting, actually. Found I enjoy it more than I expected." His reply came after a notable delay. "Painting? Since when do you paint?" "Since 2 weeks ago," I typed, smiling at the simplicity of the answer and all it implied about late-life beginnings and the fluidity of identity. The exchange with my father underscored how significantly my perspective had shifted. The obligations and expectations that had structured my existence for decades, the need to be responsible, reliable, consistent, no longer felt absolute. They were revealed as choices I'd made, roles I'd accepted, not immutable laws of nature. That afternoon, I met Elena for lunch at a small cafe near her studio. Over plates of enchiladas and glasses of fresh lime water, we discussed plans for the exhibition. She had submitted our proposal to the municipality, and initial feedback was positive. The reinvention project would have a dedicated corner in the gallery, with space for approximately 15 pieces plus accompanying text. "We should include a biographical element," Elena suggested. "Not just about your artistic journey, but the personal transformation that prompted it." I hesitated. How much of my personal story should I share? The situation with Diana and Jacob is complicated. "You don't need to include specific names or details," Elena assured me. "Just the essence, that a family betrayal became the catalyst for self-rediscovery. That kind of emotional truth is what will resonate with viewers." After lunch, we visited the gallery where the exhibition would be held, a converted colonial house with high ceilings, white walls, and original tile floors. The curator, a serious young woman named Lucia, showed us the space allocated for the Reinvention project. We're intrigued by the concept, she said, looking at the preliminary sketches Elena had brought. It's unusual to feature work from someone so new to art, but the narrative element makes it compelling. Many of our visitors will relate to the theme of beginning again. As we left the gallery, I felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. Do you really think my work is strong enough for this? I asked Elena. The question isn't whether your work meets some arbitrary standard of good enough, she replied. It's whether it communicates something authentic and valuable. And it does, Helen. It absolutely does. That evening, I dined alone at a restaurant recommended by Elena, tucked away on a side street away from the tourist centers. The owner greeted me by name, Elena had called ahead, and led me to a table in a small courtyard where a fountain provided gentle background music to the meal. The food was simple but exquisite: squash blossom soup, grilled fish with mole sauce, fresh tortillas warm from the comal. As I ate, savoring each bite without rushing, I realized how long it had been since I'd dined alone by choice rather than circumstance. In my life before, eating alone had always seemed slightly sad, something to be avoided or endured. Now it felt like a pleasure, an opportunity for reflection and sensory appreciation without the need for conversation. After dinner, I walked through the town, now familiar enough that I navigated its winding streets without conscious thought. The evening was perfect, warm but not hot, the air scented with jasmine and wood smoke. Music drifted from courtyards and rooftops. Couples strolled arm in arm, families gathered in the plaza, children chasing each other around the bandstand. I found a bench beneath a jacaranda tree and opened my sketchbook, capturing the scene, with quick, confident strokes that would have been impossible 2 weeks earlier. My hand seemed to know what to do now, translating what my eye saw and my heart felt into visual form without the hesitation that had marked my earlier attempts. As I worked, a young boy of perhaps 8 or 9 stopped to watch, his curiosity evident in his wide eyes and attentive posture. After a few minutes, he asked in halting English, "You are artist?" The question echoed Carmen's from days earlier, but this time my answer came without qualification. Yes, I am. The simple affirmation felt momentous, a threshold crossed. I wasn't adding modifiers like amateur or beginner or aspiring. I was claiming the identity directly, recognizing that the act of creating with intention and heart made me an artist, regardless of training or technique or external validation. The boy nodded solemnly, accepting my self-definition without question, then continued on his way. I returned to my sketch, working until the light faded too much to see clearly. Walking back to my hotel, I felt a sense of alignment I'd rarely experienced, as if the various parts of myself were no longer at odds, but working in concert toward a common purpose. In my room, I checked my phone to find a message from Diana, sent hours earlier. "We need to talk about Jacob's books in your apartment, and his vinyl collection. He wants to arrange to pick them up when you're back." The mundane practicality of the request was jarring after the transcendent quality of my evening. Of course, there would be logistics to handle, possessions to return, accounts to separate, formal ties to sever. The everyday reality of divorce couldn't be entirely escaped, even thousands of miles away. I texted back, "No problem, I'll let you know when I'm back. Everything is boxed up already." This was true. I'd packed Jacob's remaining possessions. Before leaving, a task that had felt final and cathartic. The boxes were stacked in my spare room, labeled and ready for collection, physical reminders of a chapter closed. Diana's reply came immediately. "Thanks. Also, Dad's birthday dinner is the weekend after next. He's expecting you to be there. Should I tell him you won't make it?" There it was again. The assumption that family events automatically superseded any plans or preferences I might have. The old Helen would have cut her trip short, rearranged her life to accommodate this expectation. The new Helen paused, considered what she truly wanted, and responded accordingly. I won't be back in time, unfortunately. Please give him my love, and I'll celebrate with him when I return. The reply felt clean, honest, without the guilt or obligation that would have colored similar communications in the past. I wasn't apologizing for my absence or justifying my choice. I was simply stating a fact and offering an alternative that worked within my own time frame. Diana's response was terse. He'll be disappointed. Undoubtedly true, but no longer determinative of my decisions. I closed the conversation with a final text. I'll call him on his birthday, then switched off my phone and returned to my sketchbook, adding details to the plaza scene from memory. As I worked, I reflected on the subtle but significant shift in my interactions with Diana and my father. I wasn't rejecting them or cutting ties. I was simply establishing boundaries that honored my own needs and choices alongside theirs. It was an adjustment that would likely take time for all of us to navigate, but it felt necessary and right. The next day dawned with unexpected rain, a gentle shower that freshened the air and brought out rich colors in the stone buildings and cobblestone streets. I spent the morning in Elena's studio, working on a new painting for the exhibition, an abstract piece inspired by the concept of thresholds, of crossing from one state of being into another. As I mixed colors and applied them to canvas, Elena worked nearby on her own projects, music playing softly in the background. The rhythm of creative work alongside another artist, each absorbed in her own process yet aware of the other's presence, created a sense of communion without the need for constant interaction. How does it feel? Elena asked during a break, to be preparing for an exhibition less than a month after picking up a brush for the first time. I considered the question. Surreal, intimidating, but also right somehow. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, even though it makes no logical sense given my background. Elena nodded approvingly. That feeling of rightness, of alignment between action and essence, is rare and precious. Many people go their entire lives without experiencing it. I know, I said softly. I almost did. The rain continued through the afternoon, keeping us in the studio longer than planned. By evening, it had subsided to a misty drizzle, and I walked back to my hotel under an umbrella borrowed from Elena, the wet streets reflecting streetlights and shop windows in shimmering puddles. In my room, I found an email from my boss. Helen, how's Mexico? Team misses you but managing well. Quick question. Any interest in the Mendoza biography project? Spanish-English bilingual edition needs senior editor with cross-cultural sensitivity. Thought of you with your extended Mexican sojourn. 6-month commitment starting in October. Let me know. The opportunity would have intrigued me even before. My time in San Miguel. A chance to work on a prestigious biography, to apply my editing skills to a bilingual text. Now it held additional appeal as a way to maintain my connection to Mexico, to perhaps even return here for research or consultation. I replied expressing interest and asking for more details, then opened my journal to record the day's experiences and reflections. As I wrote, I realized how different my entries had become since those first days in San Miguel. The early pages were dominated by pain, confusion, and disorientation, processing Diana and Jacob's betrayal, questioning my value and identity. Now they focused increasingly on creative discoveries, new relationships, moments of beauty and insight. The shift wasn't complete or irreversible. I still experienced waves of hurt and anger when thinking about the wedding and my exclusion from it. But those emotions no longer defined my days or dictated my choices. They had become part of a larger narrative rather than its controlling theme. Before sleep, I stepped onto my small terrace for a final breath of night air. The rain had cleared, leaving the sky washed clean and scattered with stars. From somewhere nearby came the sound of a guitar, playing a melody both melancholy and hopeful. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the sliver of San Miguel visible from my vantage point. Tiled rooftops, the spire of a distant church, windows glowing warm against the darkness. The scene epitomized the unexpected gift of this place. Beauty emerging from pain, new possibilities from endings, light persistent even in shadow. Tomorrow would bring more painting, more exploration, more steps toward whatever awaited at the exhibition and beyond. For tonight, it was enough to stand under the stars and know that I was exactly where I needed to be. Not running from the past, but moving deliberately toward a future of my own choosing. The night before the exhibition opening, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my hotel terrace watching the moon cast silver light over San Miguel's rooftops, trying to calm my racing thoughts. In less than 24 hours, strangers would be viewing my artwork, reading my words, witnessing the most vulnerable transformation of my life. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. 3 weeks had passed since Diana and Jacob's wedding day. 3 weeks of intensive painting, of selecting, and framing pieces for the exhibition, of crafting the narrative that would accompany them. 3 weeks of becoming someone I barely recognized, yet felt more authentic than the woman I'd been for decades. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Nervous? Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. See, you at 9 tomorrow. Her words steadied me. I'd come to rely on Elena's wisdom, her unwavering belief in the value of my journey even when my own confidence faltered. Our friendship had become one of the unexpected gifts of this Mexican sojourn, a connection based not on shared history or obligation, but on mutual recognition and respect. The exhibition space looked transformed when I arrived the next morning. Lucia, the curator, had arranged my work with an eye for storytelling, beginning with my earliest, most tentative paintings and progressing to the more assured recent pieces. Between them, excerpts from my journal were mounted on small plaques, providing context without over-explaining. "What do you think?" Lucia asked, watching as I moved slowly through the installation. "It's more powerful than I expected," I admitted. "Seeing everything together like this, the progression feels significant." "It is significant," she affirmed. "That's why we wanted to include your project. It speaks to transformation, to the courage of beginning again." Throughout the day, Elena and I made final adjustments, tweaking the lighting, rearranging a few pieces for better flow, ensuring the text was legible but not intrusive. By late afternoon, everything was ready. The exhibition would open at 7 with a small reception for the featured artists and special guests. I returned to my hotel to change, choosing a dress I'd purchased in San Miguel, indigo linen with subtle embroidery around the neckline, completely unlike anything in my wardrobe back home. As I fastened silver earrings made by a local artisan, I caught sight of my reflection and paused, struck by the change. Not just in appearance, though 3 weeks of Mexican sun had warmed my complexion, and there was a new ease in my posture, but in the eyes looking back at me. They held a clarity and purpose I hadn't seen in years, perhaps decades. Elena met me at the entrance to the gallery, elegant in a flowing black dress with a vibrant shawl draped over her shoulders. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath as we stepped inside. The space was already filling with people, local artists, expatriates, tourists who had seen the promotional posters around town. I hung back at first, watching as visitors moved through the exhibitions, pausing before paintings, reading the accompanying text. When they reached the reinvention project, many lingered longer, drawn in by the personal narrative alongside the visual progression. "You must be Helen," said a woman in her 60s, approaching with a glass of wine in hand. "I'm Janet, your project. It's speaking directly to me right now." She explained that she'd recently retired from a 40-year career in corporate law, relocating to San Miguel with no clear plan beyond escape from her former life. "I've been here 6 months and still feeling adrift," she confessed. "But seeing your work, reading about your journey, it's like permission to begin again, to consider completely new directions." Throughout the evening, similar conversations unfolded. A man who had lost his wife to cancer, seeking new purpose. A couple who had sold their business and were reimagining their third act. A young woman questioning career choices made to please parents rather than fulfill personal passions. Each found something in my story that resonated with their own crossroads. The response was overwhelming. Not because critics were hailing me as the next great artistic discovery. They certainly weren't. But because something authentic in my experience was touching others in meaningful ways. The technical imperfections of my paintings didn't matter. The emotional truth they conveyed did. Near the end of the evening, Elena pulled me aside. "Someone wants to meet you," she said, gesturing toward the gallery entrance where Carmen, the elderly woman from the residential neighborhood, stood looking somewhat out of place among the art crowd. "Carmen!" I exclaimed, crossing the room to greet her. "You came!" She nodded, her eyes bright with pride as she glanced around the gallery. "Elena told me," she said in careful English. "Your art. Here." I took her arm gently and led her to the Reinvention Project installation. "This one," I said, pointing to a watercolor of the street where we'd met, with laundry fluttering between buildings and children playing in the distance. "You helped me see." Carmen studied the painting, then turned to me with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Ves con el corazón," she repeated her phrase from our first meeting. Now others see too. The simplicity of her observation brought tears to my eyes. That was exactly what art did at its best, allowed others to see through the artist's heart, to experience the world through another's perception. When the evening ended and the last guests departed, Elena and I sat on a bench in the empty gallery, shoes off, sharing a final glass of wine. "So," she said, "tomorrow you go home." I nodded. My extended stay had stretched to its limit. My job awaited, along with the promising Mendoza biography project my boss had confirmed. My apartment needed attention, and there were relationships to recalibrate, with Diana, with my father, with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. "But I'll be back," I said with certainty. "This isn't an ending." "Of course not," Elena agreed. "San Miguel has claimed you, and your art has just begun." We sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of new beginnings, not just mine, but those of all the artists featured in the exhibition. Each had found a unique visual language, a way of translating internal experience into forms others could witness and perhaps recognize within themselves. The next morning dawned clear and brilliant, the quality of light that had first enchanted me about San Miguel now familiar but no less magical. I finished packing, placing the blue ceramic bowl and Carmen's carved wooden bird carefully among clothes, then sat down to write one final journal entry from this hotel room that had witnessed so much change. "Today I return," I wrote, "not to my old life, but to a life informed by everything discovered here. I carry with me new eyes for seeing, new hands for creating, new courage for living authentically. The pain that drove me to San Miguel hasn't disappeared. Diana and Jacob's betrayal still stings when I let myself dwell on it, but it no longer defines me. It has become, strangely, a gift, the unexpected catalyst for this reinvention." Elena met me for a farewell breakfast in the IE's hotel courtyard. We didn't speak of the exhibition's success or make specific plans for my return. Instead, we talked of small things, books we'd both read, a new cafe opening near her studio, the changing quality of light as summer approached. The conversation of friends comfortable enough for ordinariness alongside profundity. When my taxi arrived, we embraced without excessive sentiment. "Until next time," Elena said simply. Until next time, I echoed. The drive to the airport provided a final glimpse of landscapes that had become dear to me. The rolling hills, the distant mountains, the small farms with their fields of corn and beans. I wasn't leaving forever. I would return, perhaps for the Mendoza Project, perhaps for further artistic exploration. San Miguel had become part of my story now, a place of transformation I would revisit both physically and in memory. On the plane, I opened my sketchbook one last time, drawing from memory the view from my hotel terrace. Rooftops, church spires, the particular quality of Mexican light. As my pencil moved across the paper, I thought about the journey ahead. Returning would bring challenges, explaining my extended absence, navigating changed family dynamics, integrating my new artistic identity into my professional life. There would be difficult conversations, especially with Diana. I wasn't naive enough to believe our relationship could simply resume as if nothing had happened. Her choices had hurt me deeply. My transformation might bewilder or even threaten her. We would need to establish new boundaries, new understandings of who we were to each other now. Yet I felt equipped for these challenges in ways I hadn't been before San Miguel. I had discovered resources within myself: strength, creativity, the courage to prioritize my own well-being. That would serve me whatever came next. As the plane lifted above clouds, I closed my sketchbook and leaned back, feeling neither triumph nor trepidation, but a quiet readiness. My sister had married my ex-husband. My family had excluded me from the wedding. Those facts remained unchanged. What had changed was me, my capacity to create meaning from pain, to build a life defined by my own choices rather than others' expectations, to see with the heart as Carmen had taught me. That transformation was the true gift of this journey, more lasting than any painting or exhibition, and it would continue long after I returned to familiar surroundings. San Miguel de Allende receded below, but its impact remained. In my sketchbook, in my memories, in the newfound ability to recognize beauty in unexpected places. I wasn't the woman who had fled there in desperation weeks ago. I was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.